So Nintendo has announced a new, or perhaps we should say old, Star Fox game in the Star Fox Direct. Now, I must admit, I did expect that this week would see something because on Friday, Nintendo have their quarterly financial statements, but I didn't necessarily expect the specific timing, and so this is going to be quite a quick and very unusually for me, an unscripted video. I'm going to give some general responses. I'm going to talk about the price, a little bit about potential developers and the contours of their strategy. But basically, any deep dives on this will be saved for another day. And of course, I do have previous videos, which I think largely still stack up, and I'll link those at the end. So let's just talk about a few of the highlights from the announcements. So first of all, the date is the 25th of June, which is a week later than I might have expected. I kind of thought they'd have put it equidistant between Mysterious Book and Splatoon Raiders, but they are putting it slightly closer to the summer. They do often like to hug the end of June as a date. It's occasionally been the case in the past that they do put a game a little bit earlier than the end of June, but if they can hit the end of June, and I guess probably that's because of the um, end of the financial quarter, if they can hit the end of June, then they tend to do so. The budget is $50 if you want to buy it, which puts it in the exact kind of range as Metroid Prime Remastered, except obviously it is on the Switch 2 and not on the original Switch. And I suppose it will come with a $10 premium, as they, I suppose, will now frame it for the physical editions, assuming that physical edition comes out, which I assume it will. Now, that puts it into a particular category of games which are remade, remastered, whatever you want to say. And that kind of makes sense for Nintendo, I think, at this point, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it compares to Metroid Prime Remastered in a second. In terms of what it looks like, it does look impressive. I've not been a huge Star Fox player in the past. I did play it a fair bit in the 1990s, but I must admit I haven't gone back to it for a very long time, and I never really got into it then. I didn't own the game, but I did play it a bit with my brother, and I do like the world, though. I like the aesthetic, and I'm pretty excited to give it a shot. And the fact that they've gone back to 64 again, it did kind of make me laugh a little bit at first, because I know that many fans were saying, look, the one thing we don't want is another 64 version. But then again, if this is the plan, if the plan is to do the definitive version of a classic and then build from there, just like they did with Metroid Prime Remastered a little bit before Metroid Prime 4 came along, then I guess I can kind of understand it. The fact is, if a lot of people are coming to this through the movie, then they don't want another experimental title. They want to try to make it the most definitive Star Fox experience they can. And this probably also explains why they have decided to dispense with any other titles apart from the single name, Star Fox. Now, I didn't particularly expect that to be the case, but if you think about it, I do think that this works pretty solidly for them as a strategy. Best game, make it a cheap entry point, and then hopefully build up the property from there. Everything about this feels particularly geared to the US market, from the visual style to the, cinematic approach, down to the direct timing, which feels like it was a time best geared towards getting the US audience to pay attention. And I've got to say, the visuals do look absolutely amazing. I do wonder whether some of the characters feel a little bit uncanny valley in places, but I'm sure I'll very quickly get used to them. It took me maybe 30 minutes to accustomize to the Link's Awakening capsule toy look, and it's looking like it's going to take me about the same sort of period of time once I get playing to get used to this one. The character avatars are an interesting twist as well. You can use these for game chat, and so you can make it look like you are Star Fox and company as you talk and chat. I think these are a fantastic idea, and I could see them being an awful lot of fun, actually. There are a few questions that remain, and hopefully we will get an Ask the Developer interview in due course, which will answer some of them. So first of all, I'm kind of interested to know, how long was it in development? And it looks to me like it was probably a shorter time, since it is such a close adaptation, as far as we can tell, of the Nintendo 64 game. It would have made sense for a longer development window if it weren't based on that. But we also know, and I speculated previously, given when Nomura left, it seems like there wasn't a major Star Fox project on the go around 2021, 2022. And so I guess, therefore, that once they decided to put Star Fox into the movie, that really meant that they needed something to be the kind of shop window for Star Fox. in the movie window. And so my guess would be that if the movie was 2023 last time and the concept of putting Star Fox into the movie was also around 2023, then that probably also is the time when they started development of this game. And although it is a wonderful graphical feast, it's obviously not that dramatic in terms of the gameplay development, and so it's an obvious one to put in to a development if they want to hit a very specific time window. That means in terms of looking at who's developing, well, I think it's still quite possible it is an internal team, albeit with heavy external graphical support, and Nintendo have done this a lot of times. Look at the credits for Metroid Prime Remastered, and you see a lot of people that have been drafted in to help with that game, not just Iron Galaxy, but also CG Bot in Mexico did an awful lot of graphical work on that title, and I could see Nintendo using external studios to support their internal teams this time as well. In particular, of course, Bandai Namco Singapore have a long history with spacey franchises. They were rumoured, at least, to be associated with Star Wars, with Metroid, so maybe they have finally got their hands on their own deep space franchise that they're going to be able to deliver on. I don't know. The other possibility, of course, is that this could be a great opportunity for Nintendo Pictures. Nintendo Pictures launched Close to You the other month, and that was a pretty exciting insight into what they could do, and this looks similarly impressive. They have supported on games, they supported on things like the cinematics for the Super Mario RPG, so it's not a completely new thing for them to be involved in games, and I've speculated as well that they might be involved with the Ocarina of Time game if and when such a game is announced, because that's obviously got a lot of cinematic elements too, and it would make sense for Nintendo's cinematic department to be working on it. Although originally it was actually geared towards game cinematics. That was something that was talked about early on, and I do have a video deep dive from back in about 2024, I want to say, about Nintendo Pictures. The concept of it recently seems to have been geared towards the films. They talked about Close to You in connection with the films, and so I think they've obviously expanded their scope quite a bit. All the same, I think if they do want to launch Star Fox into being a multimedia franchise, then putting Nintendo Pictures at the heart of it could be an interesting approach. My thought was that they probably would give something to Illumination, and that putting Star Fox in the film was a way for Illumination to kind of put their cap over what they wanted to do with the property. Then Nintendo were deciding, yes, we're going to go with an Illumination-based future for Star Fox, but of course, these films are co-productions, so actually the other studio that's in the mix there would be Nintendo themselves, and Nintendo might well have decided that they want to structure it to give themselves the best launch platform. Now, if Nintendo do launch something themselves, I don't suppose that they will be doing anything too major. I don't think Nintendo Pictures are anywhere near close to being able to do a cinematic film, but they could do maybe the odd short or something if they have the character models and such like. I don't know. It's an interesting possibility that I'll have to look into in more depth at another point. In terms of the developers, though, I still think an internal team with a lot of support feels likely, but we probably won't have to wait all that long to find out. And of course, if this is a following of the Metroid Prime Remastered strategy, that would make this just the entree, and there may well be a bigger and more expansive original Star Fox game in a few years' time. A few other notes. It was interesting that they were keen to say right up front that Star Fox is not part of the Super Mario series, which I guess is partly setting expectations for the direct ahead for the audience who only know Star Fox as part of Mario, but also it could be a way of saying, look, this is a distinct property, we're going to keep it a distinct property just for anyone who is anxious about that. The choice of making this a direct as opposed to a different presentation, well, obviously they had quite a bit to say. They had Miyamoto there, they had Koizumi there, they were using clips from the movie, so I suspect it was always part of the plan, but it does make me wonder a little bit whether at a certain point they had the thought that they wanted to give a specific named direct so that it would kind of puncture that sense of concern that people were feeling about the lack of a direct over this long period, or the lack of a general direct anyway. At any rate, I will be back with more of a response to the financials, which are due on Friday. I can't exactly say when that will be, as this is an incredibly busy period, but I will try to have a video as soon as I can thereafter. For now, though, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.